No tents, no sleeping bags, just grass that feels suspiciously like a sponge. That sweaty armor padding that baked you during the day, now it's an ice-cold sponge wrapped around your chest. There's no campfire luxury either. If you're lucky, maybe you huddle with a few equally miserable soldiers and share body heat. If you're unlucky, you're alone, teeth chattering loud enough to alert the enemy. The night is long, dark, and full of regrets. Mainly the regret that you didn't stay home and claim bad ankle when recruitment day came around. The worst part, this cycle repeats every day. It's the same. Roasting during the battle. Freezing during the night. Your body can't keep up. You're drained, dehydrated, and one strong gust of wind away from crying. Medieval warfare wasn't just about clashing armies. It was also about surviving the world's most punishing outdoor camping trip, only without marshmallows or s'mores to make it tolerable. So, while the movies show heroic knights fighting tirelessly under banners, the truth is, half the army was either fainting in the sun or shivering in the dark. And you? You'd be doing both. You might assume that medieval soldiers marched into battle well-fed, ready to swing swords and shout slogans. Wrong. On the battlefield, food wasn't fuel, it was a punishment. Let's begin with the bread, if you can call it that. Hard as a rock baked weeks ago and crawling with little weevil roommates who are paying no rent. You don't eat the bread. You gnaw it like a frustrated beaver until your jaw aches. If you're lucky, you soften it in ale. If you're unlucky, you break a tooth and now have a dental emergency in the worst place on earth. Next up, meat. You dream of roast chicken, maybe a nice stew. Instead, you get salted pork that's been packed so long it smells like despair. Fresh meat exists, but only if you're quick enough to grab it before it spoils in the sun, or before the noblemen eat it all. For you, it's usually rancid scraps that test your stomach's loyalty. And let's just say stomachs are not loyal. Vegetables don't make me laugh. The closest you'll get to greens is the grass you collapse on when your digestion betrays you. Fruit, if it appears, is already fermenting. Congratulations, you've discovered the medieval version of kombucha, except instead of boosting your health, it sends you sprinting for the bushes and water. Oh, precious water. Clean water is a fairy tale. Streams are shared with horses, laundry, and soldiers relieving themselves upstream. So, your choice is drink dirty water and gamble with disease or stick with ale. Sounds good, right? Wrong. Ale isn't refreshing. It's warm, weak, and tastes suspiciously like someone tried to brew regret in a bucket. The result? You're constantly exhausted, dehydrated, and one bad meal away from being sidelined permanently. Instead of feeling strong and ready for battle, you're elated, weak, and wondering if maybe the enemy camp has better catering. Spoiler, they don't. Meanwhile, your commander is eating fresh bread, roasted meat, and actual wine under a silk tent. You, on the other hand, are licking crumbs off your gauntlet and trying to convince yourself that hunger builds character. It doesn't. It just builds misery. So forget visions of feasts before battle. Your rations are barely rations. They're a cruel reminder that even if the enemy doesn't take you out, indigestion probably will. You've somehow dodged arrows, outlasted mud, and even resisted the weevil-infested bread. For one glorious moment you think you're going to make it. Then the enemy surrounds you. Your weapon is knocked from your hand, and you realize you're not going to die dramatically in the mud after all. You're about to be captured, which is somehow worse. If you're a noble, there's a slim chance things go okay. You might be held for ransom, which means your wealthy family coughs up enough gold to buy you back. You'll spend a few months as an unwilling guest, probably eating better food than your men ever had before being sent home with a slightly bruised ego. Not great, but survivable. But you're not a noble, are you? You're just you. And that means no ransom, no comfy prison tent, no friendly negotiations. For the average foot soldier, capture was basically the medieval version of, you lost the game, and now the DLC is suffering. Best case scenario, you're enslaved. That's right. Congratulations. You now belong to someone else. Hope you enjoy a lifetime of farm labor in a country that doesn't even speak your language. Worst case scenario, the enemy finds you inconvenient. Feeding prisoners costs money after all, and armies didn't like spending money on anything except more pointy objects. Even if you're not executed outright, the humiliation alone is crushing. Stripped of your armor, shoved in with a group of equally miserable men. You realize you're not a proud warrior, you're cargo, and every soldier who walks past reminds you with a smirk. Then there's the psychological torture. You have no idea if you'll ever see home again. Maybe you'll be traded. Maybe you'll rot in a makeshift cell. Maybe tomorrow someone decides they're bored, and you're the entertainment. Medieval law didn't exactly include a prisoner's rights handbook. At least death on the battlefield was quick, if messy. Capture that's slow, drawn out, and filled with uncertainty. Every day is another reminder that you were important enough to survive, but not important enough to matter. So yes, you thought surrender was the safe option. Instead, you just signed up for the medieval loyalty program, where the reward for survival is misery, drudgery, and maybe, if you're lucky, an escape story no one believes. You've made it farther than anyone expected. The arrows missed, the horses trampled someone else, and you even managed to survive Steve's accidental spear poke. For a brief shining moment, you imagine this might all end with a ballad sung about you in a tavern. Then, reality sets in, standing in mud, breathing smoke. You wonder what songs meant. Battle promised immortality through pain. Reality delivers exhaustion and fragility. Arrows still darken the sky. Ground grips boots, sucking hard. Every sound echoes inside skull. Your heartbeat drums louder than fear. No bard sings this truth. War isn't glory, it's grind. Not shining, just endless confusion. Hours blur. Silence lasts years. Even survival feels strangely hollow. Victory smells like smoke, regret. The cost isn't land or banners. It's people. Gone, unnamed, forgotten. You crawl away, armor dented, mind frayed, heart dragging behind. Survival feels like winning briefly. Until next season starts again. The machine of war grinds. Hunger, disease, fear never rest. You keep going. Choice gone. Not for honor, just necessity. So picture your shining armor. Remember, heroes were mostly myths. Bones built legends, not glory. Ordinary men bore the weight. If there's a moral here, listen. Heroism wasn't conquest or fame. It was breathing one more day. The bravest act was survival. Glory never had your name. It belonged to kings, chroniclers. The powerful wrote your silence. You lived behind their legends. Shadows marched beneath shining armor. Nameless shapes fueled noble tales. You bled, they earned immortality. History forgot the hands beneath. When banners fell, fields hushed. No one searched for you. No statue rose, no verse. Just mud keeping quiet secrets. The earth swallowed story and flesh. Memory sank with every footprint. Even echoes learned to fade. Time buried names without mercy. That's the cruelest medieval joke. Valor promised, anonymity delivered cold. Halls sang one, forgot 1,000. Heroes crowned, masses erased silently. You thought pain would mean something. Fear would buy remembered honor. But parchment prefers pretty endings. Truth stains, so scribes look away. What remains of you now? A dented helmet, cracked spear, a number scrawled, ledger closed. Footsteps echo, fade, then vanish. The sun ruled all things. Rain followed, moon kept score. No clocks, no guiding calendars. Only instinct, sky, and memory. Plant early, frost steals seedlings. Plant late, winter steals harvest. Timing wasn't choice, it fate. The earth demanded perfect patience. Each season carried its rhythm. Spring meant hope, muddy prayers. Summer meant labor, endless strain. Geese feasted, peasants chased curses. Autumn became reckoning and measure. Full baskets meant warmth later. Empty ones whispered starving nights. Winter judged without second chances. No romance lived in toil, only ritual, rhythm, repetition. Turning soil, pulling stubborn weeds, waiting as green life rose. Yet even hardship held power. Here the peasant truly ruled, not by law but labor. Persistence crowned them, quiet kings. The garden bred small rebellion. Tithes took grain, lords taxes, but herbs hid behind cottages. A secret feast, humble theirs. When dusk draped over fields, lord owned land beyond fences. But gardens clung close, defiant. Freedom bloomed beside the door. Under fading, golden evening light, hands stained, earth scent thick. They stood proud, weary, content. For one fleeting moment, free. To peasants, wisdom meant survival, not luck, earned through hardship. Dirty hands, hungry seasons taught. Every pairing defied slow famine. Beans returned strength to soil. Marigolds guarded crops with bitterness. Leeks followed peas, peas barley. Rhythm written in living memory. No books held these truths. They lived in spoken lessons. Whispered, practiced, proven by patience. Harvests became their quiet scripture. The noble owned, peasants understood. Knowledge sat beneath their fingernails. Each furrow held learned faith. Each sprout, a memory reborn. Women worked the soil's secrets. They practiced unspoken, humble science. No scholar named their craft. Yet their precision fed nations. They read clouds like letters. They felt moods of roots, soil, weather, plant, all conversed. Observation became their daily prayer. A wilted leaf meant warning. A thriving stalk meant redemption. Each season corrected the last. Each failure rewrote the earth. Generations carried this wisdom forward. No titles, seals, or sermons, just hands shaping green endurance. Scraps of dirt became lifelines. Their gardens were true laboratories. Faith grew beside sustenance there. And though history forgot their names, their harvests kept the world alive. Manure was peasant alchemy, filth transformed. What animals dropped fed life. Mixed with straw, ash, scraps, it brewed warmth through seasons. Spread wide, it woke the earth. Exhausted fields breathed again, fertile. To modern eyes, it's crude. To peasants, it was magic. Every home guarded dung's worth. A humble pile meant survival. Children gathered droppings like treasure. Neighbors traded waste like gold. Nothing wasted, nothing ignored, ever. Ash soothed soil's sour heart. Broken pots became buried helpers. Every act, quiet, deliberate care. Through trial and ancient instinct, they mastered balance before science. Their gardens looped life endlessly. Cow-fed soil, soil family. Decay became renewal's language. Rot spoke softly of hope. The cycle closed, seamless, eternal. Harmony hummed beneath bare feet. Nobles feasted on silver plates. Peasants dined by earth's design. Ankle-deep in muck and moonlight, they held the world alive. Recycling at its most primal. Ingenuity born from daily struggle. Behind the cottage, steam rose. A buzzing mound hid endurance. Compost wasn't waste. It was heartbeat. Each layer whispered quiet survival. Straw, peel, dung, stories of persistence. Life reborn through humble decay. Nothing existed alone in peasant lands. Pig, hearth, table, one living circle. Even rot served sacred purpose. What died returned as sustenance. They spoke no modern science, yet practiced balance every day. Each forkful spread was faith. The earth always answered back. Year by year, soil endured, feeding families through cold seasons. Enough to live nevermore. Enough to begin again. The heap was philosophy embodied. Necessity shaped belief through patience. Nothing wasted, nothing taken lightly. Life was giving, not owning. In filth, wisdom quietly grew. Brown gold steaming beneath moonlight. Proof the peasants understood truth. Gratitude keeps the world alive. Recycling at its most primal. Ingenuity born from daily struggle. Behind the cottage, steam rose. A buzzing mound hid endurance. Compost wasn't waste. It was heartbeat. Each layer whispered quiet survival. Straw, peel, dung, stories of persistence. Life reborn through humble decay. Nothing existed alone in peasant lands. Pig, hearth, table, one living circle. Even rot served sacred purpose. What died returned as sustenance. They spoke no modern science, yet practiced balance every day. Each forkful spread was faith. The earth always answered back. Year by year, soil endured, feeding families through cold seasons. Enough to live nevermore. Enough to begin again. The heap was philosophy embodied. Necessity shaped belief through patience. Nothing wasted, nothing taken lightly. Life was giving, not owning. In filth, wisdom quietly grew. Brown gold steaming beneath moonlight. Proof the peasants understood truth. Gratitude keeps the world alive. The moon watched, calm, eternal. Mystery and mentor in one. Its glow guided peasant rhythm. Light replaced clocks, shaped certainty. To plant by moon meant trust. Patterns older than memory ruled. Silver light brushed hopeful fields. Seeds blessed beneath divine shimmer. When moon waned, rest followed. Roots drank silence, gathered strength. Each phase taught intention, patience. The sky marked human time. Not magic, experience refined faith. Generations watched, failed, then learned. The heavens became their teacher. Wisdom lived in soil's rhythm. Every row mirrored celestial order. Earth and sky spoke softly. Labor became wordless conversation eternal. Endurance met the cosmic pulse. Hardship birthed quiet harmony nightly. Forces vast embraced humble hands. They looked upward, breath suspended. Moonlight promised return through darkness. To peasants, gardens meant life. Pantry and pharmacy side by side. Hunger and healing shared soil. Small plots guarded hope fiercely. Doctors served lords and monks. The poor turned to earth. Chamomile eased fevers in pots. Yarrow bound cuts, bleeding stilled. Garlic hung, spice, shield, salvation. Wormwood's bitterness fought bitter worms. Comfrey soothed backs bent daily. Each plant whispered its purpose. Remedies lived through memory's thread. Mothers taught daughters by touch. Knowledge bloomed without written words. Survival grew in green hands. The medieval garden was memory. It held roots of resilience, a quiet pact with nature. In tangled rows and compost heaps, peasants built more than sustenance. They built endurance from earth, proof that struggle could bloom. Yet survival isn't always gentle. Sometimes it rises through fire. Sometimes it begins with rebellion. Spartacus was such defiance made flesh. Not king, not noble, not general. Just a man Rome misjudged. A soldier once, a deserter next. Captured, chained, sold like cattle. His name was meant to vanish. Instead, it became legend eternal. In Capua's grim gladiator school, men were shaped into spectacle. Bodies trained, spirits beaten hollow. Entertainment for Rome's hungry crowds. But Spartacus was Thracian-born, hardened by wild mountain winds. He endured, obeyed, but watched. Every drill, every strike noted. Rome's arena was death's theater. To Spartacus, it was strategy. He saw weakness in ritual. He waited for the fracture. Then, 73 BCE, the break. 70 men, knives from kitchens, rage for courage, freedom for cause. They burst out, killing guards. They seized blades, vanished to hills. It should have ended in crucifixion. But destiny turned on desperation. Their escape became a wildfire, a revolt Rome never foresaw. Spartacus proved more than fury. He became cunning, calculating hope. From the hills, raids began. From the raids, armies rose. Runaways, shepherds, farmers, slaves. They gathered, hungry for justice. Each man joined with nothing left. Each woman followed for freedom. Rome mocked at first, dismissed them. But 70 became 7,000. Desperation had found its banner, and at its center, Spartacus stood. He wasn't fighting for vengeance. He fought for something impossible. A world without masters, chains, fear. And as his army swelled, Rome began to tremble. Food and medicine intertwined daily. Parsley-flavored meals soothed stomachs. Cabbage healed body and spirit. Onions cured coughs and colds. The garden was constant apothecary. Healing grew beside every meal. Hands found remedies in soil. Roots and leaves held hope. But healing reached beyond flesh. Faith mixed softly with ritual. Prayers whispered through morning dew. Moonlight guided careful tending. Not every cure succeeded, no. Yet hope itself was healing. To plant meant to resist. To nurture meant to survive. Through seasons, trust remained green. Life answered softly, leaf by leaf. In winter, the garden slept. Its memory lingered through cellars, beans, onions, herbs, all endurance. Each jar whispered quiet victory. Winter made labor visible. Meals shrank, stews grew thin. Every root became defiance's proof. Every crumb, a season remembered. Planning meant survival, not luxury. Too little, hunger took hold. Too much hope, blight devoured all. So peasants learned through hardship. Seeds chosen for survival, not want. Wisdom carved deep into soil. Even frozen, the garden breathed. Hands sorted seeds by firelight. Tools mended, compost turned slowly. Stories traded of frost and fortune. The seasons looped without mercy. Labor and prayer shared rhythm. The garden fed more than hunger. It fed the will to endure. Amid lords, storms, and fate, control. Each seed whispered, life returns. Year after year, the rhythm held. Hands and soil remained bound. Hope renewed with every thaw. Roots became their truest scripture. Yet the work continued indoors. Herbs dried in summer were brewed into teas for fevers. Stored roots were rationed carefully, stretched to last until the earth softened again. Some families even sprouted beans inside clay pots near the fire for a touch of fresh green when the snow seemed endless. This cycle was relentless, repeated year after year. To miss a season, to plant too late, or to misjudge the harvest could mean hunger. But when the rhythm was kept, the peasant garden became more than a patch of earth. It became a compass guiding families through the harsh turning of the medieval year. Though each peasant family kept its own small patch of soil, no garden existed in isolation. Villages were woven together by necessity, and the sharing of seeds, cutings, and hard-earned advice was as much a part of survival as the planting itself. One household might guard a particularly hardy strain of bean, while another kept a lineage of onions that stored longer through the winter. Over time, these exchanges created a living library of plants passed hand to hand like heirlooms. Women were often the center of this quiet commerce. When neighbors gathered at the well or churchyard, gossip might be laced with gardening secrets: how to keep slugs off lettuce, which root patch had thrived despite drought, or which herb had healed a stubborn cough. Knowledge wasn't hoarded. It was traded, woven into the fabric of community life. The loss of a crop in one household could sometimes be offset by generosity from another. For all knew that next year, the roles might be reversed. Gardens also tied peasants to the larger web of tradition. Feasts and festivals often began in the soil. Garlic and leeks-flavored stews shared at midsummer gatherings. Herbs like sage and thyme seasoned communal bread. Even small celebrations like a wedding or christening drew upon the fruits of many gardens, stitched together in a shared meal that bound neighbors as tightly as kinship did. Yet community could also spark quiet competition. Who had the earliest peas? Who managed to store cabbages without rot? Who brewed the strongest nettle beer or the most soothing chamomile tea? Pride slipped between rows of beans just as surely as weeds did. And a well-kept garden was a mark of diligence, even status, among peasants who had little else to boast about. Still, in hard years, when blight, pests, or weather threatened the harvest, gardens became lifelines, not just for families but for entire villages. Shared seed stock ensured survival. Knowledge rebuilt what was lost. Small plots linked countless lives, threads woven through shared endurance. The peasant's garden meant more. It fed, healed, and united. In chaos, it remained constant, a living emblem of resilience. Survival was never solitary work. It bloomed through neighborly hands. Together they defied uncertainty's rule. Together, they rebuilt from ruin. The garden itself stayed humble, a fenced patch near the hearth. No grandeur, just quiet necessity. Yet within, life truly beat. No noble estate shone brighter. No monastery kept greater wisdom. This small ground meant everything. Gold couldn't match its worth. It healed and nourished endlessly. Each onion row whispered persistence. Companion planting guarded the harvest. Compost turned decay into life. The moon marked sowing's rhythm. Herbs doubled as humble medicine. Learning lived within their soil. Tradition taught more than books. Their legacy endures in earth. Modern words, sustainability, organic, echo them. What we name innovation now was once mere human survival. Instinct became centuries of continuity. Their rhythm still hums today, and within that ancient wisdom, peasants found something near freedom. Taxes and storms ruled lives. Yet here, hands ruled soil. A leek row meant survival. A sprig of thyme, defiance eternal. The countryside became Spartacus's recruiting ground. He welcomed men who had known nothing but the lash, women who had been sold and resold, even families who slipped away under the cover of darkness. Within months, his force was no longer a gang of fugitives, but a swelling community, bound by rage and by hope. Ancient sources disagree on the numbers, but some claimed his following reached 70,000. An astonishing figure, enough to shake the foundations of Roman control. Spartacus proved a leader of rare instinct. He trained his followers with discipline, teaching them to fight not as mobs, but as soldiers. He planned supply raids with precision, ensuring his army was not merely surviving, but thriving. Weapons were seized from fallen Roman troops. Blacksmiths among the slaves turned plows into spears, sickles into swords. The rebel camp became a rough mirror of society itself. Fighters, cooks, healers, scouts, and families, all bound together by the dream of liberty. At first, Rome barely stirred. The Senate dismissed the uprising as a nuisance. Surely a band of slaves could not threaten the Republic. They sent militia, poorly trained, poorly led, to crush the revolt. To their shock, Spartacus smashed them. His troops struck with speed and cunning, ambushing patrols, cutting supply lines, vanishing into the hills before organized counterattacks could form. Each victory brought new recruits, new weapons, new courage. Across Italy, whispers spread like wildfire. For the first time, slaves dared to imagine the impossible, that Rome itself could bleed. What frightened the Senate most was not just the victories, but what they meant. A gladiator, a man trained for amusement, was now defeating Rome's legions. The social order that had chained millions was beginning to tremble. The rebellion was no longer an escape. It was a movement. Still, arrogance clouded Rome's judgment. The Senate treated Spartacus as a blemish, not a threat. Surely they thought this would end soon. But as reports arrived, patrols slaughtered, towns raided, entire regions sliding into panic, Rome's pride turned to fear. Spartacus's victories had become an embarrassment. Worse, they had become an inspiration. In 73 BCE, the Senate finally took action. They sent Praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber, a proper commander with a disciplined force, to end the rebellion once and for all. But Spartacus was already waiting. Senate dispatched a Praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber with a proper force to deal with the uprising. His orders were simple: surround Spartacus and starve him into submission. Glaber marched his men to block the rebels on Mount Vuvius, confident that hunger would do his work for him. But Spartacus had no intention of waiting quietly to die. Using ropes woven from vines, he and his men scaled down the steep side of the mountain, surprising the Romans from behind. In a brutal clash, Glaber's forces were routed, their camp overrun, their supplies seized. The Senate's first real attempt to crush Spartacus ended in humiliation. This defeat sent shockwaves through Rome. It was one thing for militia to be beaten, quite another for a prior and his legions to be outsmarted by slaves. A second prior was dispatched, Vinius, but he too suffered defeats, his soldiers scattered and his camp captured. Each Roman failure added fuel to the rebellion, drawing more men and women to Spartacus's cause. By now, the revolt could no longer be dismissed as a minor uprising. Spartacus commanded tens of thousands, moving through the Italian countryside with both cunning and ferocity. He was not seeking random chaos. His strategy was to march north, escape Italy, and lead his people back to their homelands beyond Roman control. Freedom, not conquest, seemed his goal. Yet, freedom for slaves meant humiliation for Rome. To allow Spartacus to succeed would undermine the very foundation of Roman society, built on the labor of millions in bondage. The Senate could no longer afford half measures. The rebellion had grown into a war, and Rome would have to treat it as such. The time of dismissing Spartacus was over. With the Prius humiliated, Spartacus suddenly found himself the master of an army Rome had failed to contain. What had started as 70 men armed with kitchen knives was now a swelling host. Tens of thousands strong, hardened by desperation and inspired by victory. These were not polished legions, but men and women who had escaped chains and tasted triumph. That taste was intoxicating. Spartacus's plan, at least in the beginning, was straightforward. Escape Italy. He knew Rome would never forgive a slave revolt, and every victory only made the Senate more determined to destroy him. The Alps lay to the north, beyond which freedom beckoned. If his people could break through, they might scatter back to Gaul, Thrace, and beyond, slipping forever from Rome's grasp. It was a bold vision. Tens of thousands of slaves marching like a migrating nation, carrying their families, their hopes, and their vengeance toward the mountains. The march north was anything but simple. The rebels clashed with multiple Roman forces sent to intercept them. And each time Spartacus proved himself a strategist of rare talent. He divided his forces when needed, used ambushes in rugged terrain, and struck quickly at isolated detachments before they could regroup. Roman commanders who expected disorganized mobs instead found themselves fighting disciplined formations, led by a man who understood both cunning and courage. Ancient sources described the shock in Rome as entire legions faltered before a gladiator's army. Spartacus defeated consular forces, humiliating men who had once held the highest offices in the Republic. Camps were captured, standards seized, supplies redistributed to his followers. With every clash, Spartacus's legend grew, and so did the fear gripping Rome. But within the rebel ranks, unity began to crack. Not all shared Spartacus's vision. Some wanted escape, others, vengeance. Crixus, a fellow gladiator, urged the rebels to stay in Italy, to plunder and revel in their newfound power. Spartacus dreamed of freedom beyond the Alps. Crixus dreamed of retribution. Their divide would soon become fatal. For now, victory still carried them forward. By 72 BCE, Spartacus reached the northern frontier. The Alps rose before him, cold, unyielding, and beyond them, freedom. For a moment it seemed possible tens of thousands might slip through Rome's grasp, vanishing beyond its reach forever. But fate, and perhaps pride, turned him back. Spartacus urged his people to climb north, yet many refused. They were not all Thracians, but Gauls, Germans, shepherds, and farmers, men who had known nothing but bondage in Roman soil. Why flee, they asked, when Rome's treasures lay within reach? Crixus and his followers broke away, choosing to raid the countryside. It was a fatal choice. Roman legions fell upon them. Tens of thousands were slaughtered. Rome celebrated the massacre. Spartacus did not. Ancient accounts claim he forced captured Romans to fight to the death in mock games, a grim tribute to his fallen comrades. It was no longer rebellion, it was vengeance made flesh. Then came Spartacus's fateful decision. Instead of crossing the Alps, he turned south, back toward the heart of the empire. Historians still debate why. Some say his army refused to leave, others believe Spartacus himself dreamed of marching on Rome. Whatever the reason, the chance for escape was gone. The rebellion was no longer flight. It was war. By now, Rome had endured humiliation after humiliation. Praetors had failed, consuls had fallen, entire legions had been routed by a man who should have been dust in the arena. Rome needed redemption, and it found it in Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the richest men in the Republic, ambitious, ruthless, hungry for glory. Unlike those before him, Crassus treated the uprising as a true war. He raised 6 new legions, 40,000 men, and fused them with the battered remnants of those already broken. But numbers were not his weapon. Discipline was. When one legion fled in battle, Crassus revived an ancient punishment: decimation. Every 10th man executed by his own comrades. It was brutal and effective. Fear of Spartacus was replaced by fear of Crassus. Under his command, Rome's army became a machine of obedience, forged in terror and iron. Meanwhile, Spartacus's army pressed southward, plundering estates, seizing supplies, still winning battles, but beginning to fracture. Resources ran thin, discipline wavered, and on the horizon, Rome's vengeance was gathering. Camps were captured, standards seized, supplies redistributed to his followers. With every clash, Spartacus's legend grew, and so did the fear gripping Rome. But within the rebel ranks, unity began to crack. Not all shared Spartacus's vision. Some wanted escape, others, vengeance. Crixus, a fellow gladiator, urged the rebels to stay in Italy, to plunder and revel in their newfound power. Spartacus dreamed of freedom beyond the Alps. Crixus dreamed of retribution. Their divide would soon become fatal. For now, victory still carried them forward. By 72 BCE, Spartacus reached the northern frontier. The Alps rose before him, cold, unyielding, and beyond them, freedom. For a moment it seemed possible tens of thousands might slip through Rome's grasp, vanishing beyond its reach forever. But fate, and perhaps pride, turned him back. Spartacus urged his people to climb north, yet many refused. They were not all Thracians, but Gauls, Germans, shepherds, and farmers, men who had known nothing but bondage in Roman soil. Why flee, they asked, when Rome's treasures lay within reach? Crixus and his followers broke away, choosing to raid the countryside. It was a fatal choice. Roman legions fell upon them. Tens of thousands were slaughtered. Rome celebrated the massacre. Spartacus did not. Ancient accounts claim he forced captured Romans to fight to the death in mock games, a grim tribute to his fallen comrades. It was no longer rebellion. It was vengeance made flesh. Then came Spartacus's fateful decision. Instead of crossing the Alps, he turned south, back toward the heart of the empire. Historians still debate why. Some say his army refused to leave. Others believe Spartacus himself dreamed of marching on Rome. Whatever the reason, the chance for escape was gone. The rebellion was no longer flight. It was war. By now, Rome had endured humiliation after humiliation. Praetors had failed. Consuls had fallen. Entire legions had been routed by a man who should have been dust in the arena. Rome needed redemption, and it found it in Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the richest men in the Republic, ambitious, ruthless, hungry for glory. Unlike those before him, Crassus treated the uprising as a true war. He raised 6 new legions, 40,000 men, and fused them with the battered remnants of those already broken. But numbers were not his weapon. Discipline was. When one legion fled in battle, Crassus revived an ancient punishment: decimation. Every 10th man executed by his own comrades. It was brutal and effective. Fear of Spartacus was replaced by fear of Crassus. Under his command, Rome's army became a machine of obedience, forged in terror and iron. Meanwhile, Spartacus's army pressed southward, plundering estates, seizing supplies, still winning battles, but beginning to fracture. Resources ran thin, discipline wavered, and on the horizon, Rome's vengeance was gathering. For hours, the rebels fought with a desperation that shocked even hardened soldiers. Armed with weapons scavenged from years of victories, they crashed against Rome's shields in wave after wave. The ground became a chaos of dust, iron, and cries. Spartacus himself fought at the front, not directing from safety, but carving a path with his sword. Ancient accounts describe him cutting down 2 centurions and fighting his way toward Crassus himself, as if determined to end the war in single combat. He was wounded, yet he fought on, surrounded by his comrades. Eventually, pressed on all sides, Spartacus fell, not crawling, not begging, but standing, sword still in hand. His body was never recovered, swallowed in the carnage of his final stand. The rebellion ended that day. Tens of thousands of slaves lay dead, and the survivors, those unlucky enough to be captured, were shown no mercy. Crassus ordered 6,000 of them crucified along the Ion Way, lining the road from Capua to Rome with bodies as a warning. Travelers would pass those crosses for years, a grim reminder of what awaited anyone who dared defy the Republic. Spartacus's dream of freedom died with him, but his legend had only just begun. The rebellion of Spartacus ended in blood, but its memory refused to die. For Rome, the revolt was both a humiliation and a lesson. The Republic had survived, but only after expending vast resources and suffering repeated defeats at the hands of men it considered beneath contempt. Spartacus had shaken the confidence of the Senate, reminding Rome that the foundation of its power, millions of slaves, could also become its greatest weakness. Official Roman histories portrayed him as a dangerous criminal, a man who threatened the social order. Yet even hostile sources could not hide a grudging respect. Plutarch described Spartacus as intelligent, courageous, and a leader of remarkable ability. For a Thracian gladiator, he achieved what few generals could, defeating consuls, routing legions, and keeping an army alive for nearly 2 years against the might of the Republic. His failure was inevitable, but his defiance was unforgettable. The crucifixions along the Ion Way were meant to silence rebellion forever. But the sight of 6,000 broken bodies may also have fueled the legend. Those who passed along that road saw not just punishment, but a warning of how close Rome had come to disaster. The rebellion haunted the Republic, making elites wary of any hint of unrest among the enslaved masses. In some ways, Spartacus had already achieved what he wanted. He made Rome afraid. Centuries later, his name would be reimagined, transformed from rebel to symbol. To revolutionaries, he became a hero of freedom, a man who dared to rise against impossible odds. To storytellers, his tale became one of courage, sacrifice, and the dream of breaking chains. Even today, Spartacus is remembered less as a defeated slave and more as a defiant figure who challenged an empire. His rebellion did not end slavery, nor did it topple Rome. Yet it carved a place in history far larger than its outcome. Spartacus embodied the universal struggle for freedom, the willingness to fight even in the face of certain death, rather than accept a life of bondage. In that sense, his legacy endures. Rome crushed his body, but it could not erase the idea he carried, that even the lowest could rise against the mighty, and for a fleeting moment make the empire tremble. A symposium did not begin with wine. It began with arrival. To be invited was already a mark of status. Only men of the elite were welcome, along with the occasional philosopher or guest whose cleverness outweighed his birth. The setting was the andron, the men's chamber of a wealthy household. It was a space built for display as much as for comfort. Its floors often decorated with intricate mosaics, its walls painted with mythological scenes. This was not a place for farming talk or petty concerns. It was a stage where politics, poetry, and philosophy would unfold over the course of a long, intoxicating night. Guests arrived at dusk, greeted by servants who carried water basins for hand washing and jars of scented oil to dab on skin and hair. To recline at a symposium was not simply to sit, it was to present oneself. Cloaks were arranged just so, sandals polished, hair oiled and combed. Appearance mattered, for here one would not only drink, but also compete in conversation, wit, and reputation. Inside the andron, couches lined the walls, angled toward small tables set with cups, bowls, and garlands of flowers. Slaves bustled quietly, preparing wine bowls and laying out the first offerings to the gods. Before anything else, a libation was poured. Wine spilled in honor of Dionysus, the god of revelry, and often to Zeus or other deities, as if to remind the guests that even excess required divine approval. Once reclined, each man had his place with the host, typically directing the order of the evening. The layout was intimate, yet calculated. No one could hide, and each guest was expected to contribute. The symposium was not a feast of food. The main meal was eaten beforehand. Instead, it was a feast of words, ideas, and indulgence. Food, if present, was light: fruits, nuts, honeycakes. What mattered was the wine, the music, and the company. To step into the andron was to cross a threshold. Outside were the duties of war, politics, and family. Inside was a world suspended, half sacred, half decadent, where the rules of ordinary life bent under the influence of conversation, laughter, and the slow rhythm of diluted wine. It was a night of masks without masks, where truth might surface in jest, and jest might alter truth. The heart of any symposium was wine, but never straight from the jar. To drink undiluted wine was considered barbaric, something Thrians or Scyans might do. Greeks prided themselves on moderation through ritual, and so the first act after libations was mixing. In the center of the room stood the crater, a great bowl into which wine and water were poured together. Ratios varied. Sometimes 3 parts water to 1 part wine, sometimes lighter or stronger depending on the host's mood. But the principle remained the same. Civilized men drank together, not to forget themselves entirely, but to stretch the night with wit and pleasure. Presiding over this delicate balance was the symposia, the evening's ruler. He might be elected by the guests or chosen by the host, and his authority was absolute for as long as the symposium lasted. The symposia decided how strong the wine would be mixed, how quickly it would flow, and when cups would be refilled. In theory, he was the guardian of moderation. In practice, he could turn the gathering into either a gentle night of philosophy or a raucous carnival of excess. Slaves moved silently around the room, dipping pitchers into the crater and refilling kyaxes, shallow, wide cups that forced a man to drink slowly and carefully. Wine was not only for thirst, it was the medium through which truth and playfulness emerged. In wine, truth, said the Greeks, believing that a loosened tongue revealed the inner soul. Yet it was a careful balance. Too much and conversation collapsed into chaos. Too little, and the spirit of the symposium never stirred. To keep the night alive, wine was often accompanied by games of endurance and skill. Guests might be challenged to drain a cup in a single gulp or hold steady while tossing dregs in the game of kotbos. All of this unfolded under the watch of the symposia, who was as much conductor as dictator. His choices decided whether the evening produced timeless verses and political schemes, or ended with slurred quarrels and overturned tables. In the Greek imagination, wine was not just drink, but a bridge between men and gods, between seriousness and laughter, between wisdom and folly. The crater in the center was both altar and engine, its mixing bowl setting the tempo of the night. Once the wine began to flow, the symposium shifted from ritual to rhythm. Conversation filled the air, but music gave the evening its pulse. The most common sound was the sharp, piercing melody of the owos, a double-piped flute that could be playful or mournful depending on the mood. It was usually played by hired entertainers, women known simply as flute girls. These were not wives or daughters of the guests, but professional performers, slaves or courtesans brought in to animate the gathering. Their role was more than background music. They provided spectacle, allure, and sometimes intimacy, moving fluidly between art and seduction. Other instruments joined the chorus. The kithara, a lyre-like stringed instrument beloved by poets, or small drums and rattles to keep rhythm. Guests themselves often took part reciting poems, singing bawdy songs, or improvising verses on themes thrown at them by others. In a world without recordings or stages, entertainment was immediate and participatory. Each guest was both audience and performer, judged not only by his wit, but also by his musical grace. Music was not just diversion, it was believed to shape the soul. Philosophers argued whether certain melodies encouraged courage, restraint, or indulgence. To some, the symposium was a training ground for harmony of character. To others, it was simply an excuse to drown out serious thought with dancing and laughter. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between. The flute girls, meanwhile, embodied the symposium's contradictions. They were outsiders, often slaves, yet central to the atmosphere. They might play, sing, pour wine, or slip into more intimate roles as the night deepened. Their presence blurred the line between performance and pleasure, between art and desire. For the elite men reclining on couches, this was part of the charm. The symposium existed precisely in that space where refinement and indulgence collided. As cups refilled and the tempo of the evening rose, music set the tone. A solemn hymn might ease the night into thoughtful debate. while a lively tune could push guests into games, laughter, and playful quarrels. The symposium was never static. Like the wine in the crater, it was mixed, part sacred, part profane, part wisdom, part excess, and the music ensured that balance never stopped shifting. If music and wine set the rhythm of a symposium, conversation provided its soul. Reclining on couches with cups in hand, guests turned the gathering into a theater of words. Here, politics could be whispered, poetry recited, and philosophy argued with the same intensity as a jewel in the arena. The symposium was not simply a drinking party. It was also a place where ideas were sharpened and reputations made. The topics could range from the profound to the absurd. One guest might recite lines from Homer, sparking a debate about the nature of heroism. Another might propose a riddle or challenge others to compose verses on the spot. Political men used the setting to test arguments, float alliances, or whisper criticisms of rivals under the cover of intoxicated laughter. Philosophers, especially in Athens, turned the symposium into a classroom where wisdom was pursued not through formal lectures but through playful, probing dialogue. Plato's symposium immortalized this aspect of the tradition. In it, Socrates and his companions, drinking deep into the night, discussed the nature of love. For them, wine loosened the tongue, but also stripped away pretense, revealing truths that might have remained hidden in sober daylight. To speak at a symposium was to gamble. Your wit, your knowledge, your very character were on display before peers who would not hesitate to laugh at weakness or celebrate brilliance. Yet the line between wisdom and folly was thin. As the wine deepened, conversation could slide from lofty debates to bawdy jokes or heated quarrels. A guest too drunk might expose himself to ridicule, his arguments collapsing into slurred nonsense. Moderation, again, was the key. The best symposi balanced seriousness with levity, mixing philosophy with humor in the same way the wine was mixed with water. What made symposium conversation so powerful was its intimacy. These were not public speeches or formal assemblies. They were private exchanges among equals, spoken in a room fragrant with incense and resonant with music. Ideas could be tested in a freer way, without the rigid protocols of the agora. And sometimes, amid laughter and excess truths, were uncovered that might reshape a man's life, or in the case of philosophers like Plato, echo through centuries. The symposium was thus a paradox, a place of indulgence, but also a forge of thought. In the mingling of wine and words, wisdom and wit were never far apart. As the evening ripened and the wine took hold, the symposium became a playground. Conversation and philosophy gave way to contests that mixed skill, laughter, and sometimes humiliation. These games were not distractions. They were central to the event, a way to test wit, agility, and charm in a setting where reputations were always at stake. The most famous of these diversions was kotos. Guests would take the dregs of wine left in their cups, and with a flick of the wrist hurl the liquid across the room toward a target, perhaps a bronze dish balanced on a stand. The goal was to strike it so that it rang with a satisfying clang. Success was greeted with applause and laughter. Failure often brought mockery, but kotobos was more than a test of accuracy. Men would dedicate their throws to lovers or muses, claiming victory as a sign of favor from the gods or from desire itself. A well-aimed splash could be both a declaration and a flirtation. Other contests unfolded in verse. Guests challenged one another to recite poetry, compose impromptu lines, or answer riddles on the spot. A clumsy answer earned jeers. A clever rhyme could elevate a man's standing in the eyes of his companions. These contests blurred the line between entertainment and intellectual sparring, a reminder that even in play, the symposium was a stage for performance. Drinking itself often became a game. The symposia might command that cups be drained in a single gulp, or that each round grow progressively stronger. To falter was to show weakness. To endure was to display resilience and mastery over the intoxicating power of wine. In some symposia, this competition spiraled into chaos, with songs growing louder, laughter sharper, and bodies slumping on couches in surrender to Dionysus. For all their frivolity, these games carried meaning. They revealed skill, wit, and self-control, or the lack of it. They also bound the group together. Laughter over a missed throw of kotobos or admiration for a brilliant verse reminded each man that he was part of a community, however fleeting. In the flicker of lamplight with garlands slipping from their heads, the players of these games tasted both camaraderie and competition, pleasure and pride. The symposium was never only about wine or talk. It was about the unpredictable spark when people mixed seriousness with play, wisdom with excess. And in that blend, the games thrived. Beneath the laughter, the wine, and the clever verses, the symposium pulsed with another force. Eros' desire was woven into the fabric of the evening, never far from the surface. While wives remained absent, respectable women were not invited into the men's chamber. Other companions often joined. Courtesans, flute girls, and sometimes even young male beloveds moved among the couches, blurring the line between performance and intimacy. For the Greeks, Eros was not simply lust, but a complex bond of attraction, mentorship, and power. To be invited was to be recognized. To be left out was a slight. Some gatherings were more about power than pleasure, where plots against rivals were hatched, military campaigns discussed, and friendships secured with laughter and oaths. Philosophy often merged with politics. When Socrates and his circle debated love at a symposium, their words also touched on leadership, virtue, and the nature of authority. To discuss what made a good lover was not far from discussing what made a good statesman. The same skills, charm, persuasion, endurance applied to both. But politics in the symposium was not without risk. A poorly timed boast, a drunken insult, or an overheard conspiracy could ripple outward. Enemies might twist a man's words against him. The intimacy of the andrin could nurture alliances, but it could also plant the seeds of rivalry. For many Greek elites, the symposium was not only an escape from duty, but a rehearsal for it. Battles might be fought on fields, laws debated in the assembly. But here, amid garlands, flute music, and cups of diluted wine, the real groundwork of influence was laid. Decisions made in the flickering lamplight of a symposium could echo into the daylight of the polis. For all their claims of moderation, Greek symposia were fragile balancing acts. With enough wine, wit could curdle into insult, games into brawls, and philosophy into farce. Dionysus, god of revelry, always lurked with a smile in the corner, ready to nudge a gathering from brilliance into beatum. Drunkenness was both expected and feared. A guest too eager with his cup might suddenly forget poetry and politics, slurring insults at rivals or boasting far beyond his worth. Arguments flared quickly when pride was wounded and fists or even furniture could fly. Ancient writers tell us of symposia ending in shattered cups, overturned couches, and guests stumbling into the streets with blackened eyes. What began as a night of refinement could collapse into chaos before dawn. Sexual tensions also stoked disorder. Courtesans and flute girls, objects of affection and competition, sometimes became flashpoints for jealousy. A dedication in kotabos, meant to flatter, could spark offense, while a bold advance might escalate into a quarrel. In a room charged with desire, wit, and violence were separated only by a thin veil of restraint. The dangers of excess extended beyond bruises. Drunken speech, once dismissed as playful, could return in daylight as evidence. A cutting remark about a magistrate, a whispered conspiracy, or even a careless insult toward a god could destroy reputations. The symposium promised intimacy, but it was never free of risk. What was said in wine did not always stay in wine. Philosophers often warned of this danger. Plato, through the voice of Socrates, argued that drunkenness stripped away reason and corrupted the very purpose of the symposium. Aristotle, too, remarked on the thin line between the liberation of wine and its ruin. To drink moderately was to loosen the tongue toward wisdom. To drink excessively was to lose control entirely. Yet perhaps this risk was part of the allure. The symposium was not meant to be safe. Its very purpose was to push men into spaces where ordinary rules dissolved, where laughter, lust, and rage mingled freely. Sometimes it produced poetry that echoed for centuries. Other times it ended in broken noses and bruised pride. Excess was always the shadow of the symposium. Without it, the gathering risked dullness. With it, the gathering risked disaster. The guests never knew which way the night would turn. When dawn crept in and the last lamps flickered out, the symposium left behind more than empty cups and garlands crushed into the floor. It left memories, alliances, bruised egos, and sometimes verses that would outlive their authors. For the Greeks, the symposium was never just a party. It was a mirror of their culture. Equal parts wisdom and indulgence, philosophy and pleasure. At its best, the symposium was a crucible of ideas. Here, Plato imagined conversations on love that shaped Western philosophy for centuries. Poets tested new lines before audiences quick to laugh or mock. Politicians rehearsed arguments that would echo later in the assembly. The intimacy of the andron made it a workshop for thought where the barriers of public life could briefly fall away. At its wildest, the symposium was a theater of excess. Wine blurred boundaries and Dionysus reigned. Guests sang, joked, competed, and sometimes collapsed in a tangle of limbs. The night could end in a masterpiece of verse or in brawls spilling into the streets. This unpredictability was the essence of the tradition. The symposium was both cultivated and chaotic, sacred and profane, restrained by ritual, yet always flirting with disorder. The social lessons ran deep. The symposium reinforced class distinctions. Wives and respectable women excluded, slaves serving silently, while elite men reclined as masters of wit and indulgence. It also exposed the fragility of that order. For in drink and desire, masks could slip and truths emerge. To host or attend was to gamble, not only with reputation, but with the possibility of transformation. Though centuries have passed, the allure of the symposium endures. Scholars study its role in shaping philosophy, literature, and politics. Artists depict its reclining figures, cups in hand, in fresco and vases. And the very idea of mixing conversation, music, and wine lingers in our own social gatherings, though perhaps with less poetry and more noise. In the end, the Greek symposium was a paradox, like the culture that created it. Disciplined yet indulgent, serious yet playful, intellectual yet sensual. Reclining on couches beneath the gaze of Dionysus, the Greeks explored not only pleasure but also the boundaries of truth, desire, and community. And that mixture of wine and wisdom remains one of their most lasting legacies.